Obviously, we want to, if I'm pulling somebody over, make sure you know.
Standalone, you yeah.
All right, folks, ready to get started again. Hello? In the room. I don't want to get wrong, but I will. Okay, we're ready to get going again. So first up, let's see, in this session, we've got Sarah, who's joining us via Zoom, and Brendan. We're going to talk about why and how law schools should assess faculty tech competency. I know y'all are interested in that. So take it away.
Thank you. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
Great. So yeah, thank you for taking the time to hear our thoughts and approach to assessing tech competency in our faculty. I feel like I should be able to advance the slides. Okay, great. I'm Sarah Grass, and in my role as Director of the Law Library and IT at Seton Hall, I oversee the implementation of technology across the law school in a variety of forms. I am very fortunate to have Brendan in the newly created role as the Director of Law Practice and Educational Technology to really focus not just on how we expand tech resources, but also on adoption and effective implementation of those technologies. So one of the major projects that he is tackling is the creation of a program to improve the overall level of our faculty tech skills through training, but also through assessment. So I'm going to talk a little bit about why we think this is important, and then Brendan is going to give a much more detailed overview of this project. So it is simply a fact, and I don't necessarily think I need to justify it with any citation, that modern lawyers must use technology. More states than not require attorneys to be technologically competent and stay abreast of changes related to legal technology. Technological proficiency is indisputably a part of being practice ready upon graduation from law school. And law schools, I think, are taking their role in creating technically competent lawyers seriously, not so much as it relates to the law of technology, but legal practice technology, the things that keep, workplaces up and running and enabling them to maintain their ethical duties to their clients. We see this happening with law schools investing in technology and providing students to use technology. Laptop requirements are standard, virtual meetings have become commonplace and acceptable, and most law students have access to a variety of different types of technology training. There's even some discussion in academia about establishing minimum tech competency standards that align with the updated rules of professional conduct and state bar guidance. But, sorry, too far. One area where we, I think, do need to make progress is with our faculty. Well, a handful of faculty embrace technology. I think we have all seen those who ignore or resist it. They may argue that it doesn't really contribute to their teaching and it doesn't really enhance the overall experience of students in their classrooms. And while it may not be necessary to use technology to transmit information, law faculty are more to our students than just purveyors of instructional content. They're critical role models in a culture that produces graduates who enter the profession prepared with not just knowledge about the law, but an understanding of what it means to be a lawyer. Technophobic faculty communicate to students that proficiency with technology is not an important part of their professional identity. And I don't think that this attitude towards new technology or even well-established technology is conscious or motivated by an actual dislike or rejection of technology as a whole. Rather, I think that a lot of the faculty who avoid using technology in the classroom or as part of their professional lives are uncomfortable with it, either because they don't fully understand how it works, or they lack faith in their own ability to make it work in the moment as it is intended to be used. So this is why we really need to shine a light on our faculty technology skills and focus on building them up rather than enabling them to delegate or avoid the use of technology altogether. Our educational environments have a rapidly exploding number of technology options, and those technology options and the environments in which they exist are increasingly complex. Our students enter law school having had tech-enabled experiences in undergrad, flipped or blended classes, and they expect to see the same types of technology utilized competently at the graduate level. At the same time, though, many schools are experiencing staff cuts and reductions in financial resources, and we can't provide concierge IT services to every faculty member in every classroom. So given the lack of tolerance for technology failure that increasingly tech-savvy students exhibit, faculty must be able to handle the basics of instructional technology on their own. We are not suggesting that faculty need to have the same skills as IT professionals, or even that legal instruction needs to transform to accommodate new technology. We are simply taking the position that law faculty should feel comfortable and competent using basic applications and hardware to communicate with students and colleagues, to deliver class presentations without assistance. This means understanding applications like Word and Outlook, as well as storage applications like OneDrive and SharePoint where they're utilized. If the school or university has a learning management system, they should understand how to populate that LMS with content that is useful for their students rather than delegating that to an assistant. They should be able to create and deliver lectures using PowerPoint and also media like audio and video clips to both in-person and virtual audiences, maybe even at the same time. And then finally, they should be able to operate the equipment that they use for teaching and participating in the general business of the law school, including microphones, cameras, and even multiple screens.
There we go.
My internet connection is unstable.
Yeah, that's what he's.
Mine said it was reconnected.
Should all reflect. Yeah.
I think we're back now.
Yeah.
Something went.
Did you guys lose me?
Yeah, just for a sec.
Okay.
I think you might have lost us.
Oh, okay. You guys were always there for me, So I'm sorry I wasn't there for you. Okay, I'm almost done. So to help us identify the gaps in faculty knowledge and strategize how we might use our resources to more effectively achieve a basic level of technology competence amongst our faculty, we have developed, or Brendan has developed, a faculty tech assessment pilot that we will be administering to law faculty this summer. The results of this assessment are not punitive. Faculty who demonstrate a need for skill development will receive training and support. And we hope our design and strategy will inspire others to develop similar initiatives. I think as faculty see their colleagues grow more confident with using technology, an expectation of basic skills will become the norm.
So how do we design this assessment? The things, we had to look at factors first. We didn't want to go with something like Procertas because it's more professional based, and that's what they're teaching, like how to become a professional and become proficient in a lot of these technologies. What we're looking at is more what's inside the classroom, what you need to know to become competent as a professor. So what we ended up deciding and going with is Microsoft Forms. Now, we like this because you can take a lot of this data, we can share it with each other. You can do multiple choice, you can do true false, you can upload documents in here, and we already sold our soul to Microsoft, so it's basically free for us. So rather than collecting dust, we wanted to make sure that we made use of that. We wanted to make sure that this was a self-guided tour of technology. So in the sense that we don't want to belittle professors, we want to enrich them. Nobody wants to stand in front of a room of people and know that they're incorrect or they're wrong. So a lot of what we designed this to do is to make them feel like they're the ones that are self-teaching themselves, self-assessing where they're at with technology and where they should be at, and kind of self-reflecting on what they could do to improve their own technology. The second thing that we want to get out of this is both quantitative and qualitative information. So I know a lot about the professors in our law school, but it's all anecdotal, it's all up in my head. I've interacted with like all but one adjunct, every single person, but I've got no stats to back up what they actually know and don't know. So that's a big key of this, is getting actual quantitative information off this. But at the same time, I know that so many of these professors have no idea the words or like the tech words. They have their own tech language. They have their own muscle memory when using a lot of this technology. So the very final question on each of these assessments is an uploaded document question. Basically, here's the criteria for what you need to do and put inside your document, upload it, and then we can double check to see if you actually know what you're doing or not. So it doesn't really matter if you don't know the exact words, you don't know what windowed mode is in PowerPoint, as long as you know how to do windowed mode in PowerPoint, that's what we're looking for. And the final thing that we want is real-time feedback for the professors. They can't be waiting to find out whether they're right or wrong on these. After every single question, there is either a correct or incorrect, and it's based on branching inside of Microsoft Forms. If, depending on like whatever you answer, whatever you click, you get a different question that says whether you're correct or not. You get a reason for why you were correct or incorrect. And then you also get a helpful hint for this. And the helpful hint is really like a niche practical use inside of our building. So if we talk about font sizes in PowerPoint, our screens, this is like a 120-inch screen here in Chicago. Some of our screens are 300+ inches inside the classroom. You need a different font size inside those rooms. There's also, the rooms are painted white inside of the building and have like an obnoxious glare from some of the lights. So you need to understand each of the rooms inside the building to find out how your PowerPoint should actually be designed to be truly visible to both the people at home and the people there inside the room. We also know that it doesn't stop there with just an assessment. So we push this out to people, right, this pilot program, to get them to take this assessment and kind of get their brains moving. Text. Let me reshare that screen. There we go. Keep going. So it's basically 5 to 7 minute videos that you're going through on here. There we go. It also acts as a visual knowledge base. So in the IT world, if you've ever heard of a KB article, it's basically information there to tell you what the problem is, how to solve the problem. So it's not all up in your head. Other people can view that, see what a problem is, a unique, novel thing. That's what this basically serves as. It's also a visual knowledge base that will just last forever. So when people go back in the future, I'm not around to teach people how to do something. They can go to this website. They can kind of go through all this information. It's basically like a buffet course, buffet content. So if you already know something, you don't need to watch something to get to the next step. You can skip around depending on what you know or do not know. For the people who don't do well on that initial assessment, we do targeted development to them. Say you didn't do that well on the PowerPoint assessment, I'm going to send you an email and be like, check out this PowerPoint stuff. I'm not going to leave it to chance and be like, here's 1,000 things to look at. I'm going to concentrate on getting people the information they actually need. And all of this that's going by is basically guiding people through concepts. It's both a 10,000 foot and a 10-foot view of things. We're not just teaching people literally how to log into Microsoft, but we're also teaching them, if you've got a 15-inch laptop and you're teaching a fully remote class and you want your left-hand side of the screen shared and your students on the right, we're going in depth with that to teach like a fully correct class online doing that. And finally, it's not graded. There's no tests on this. This is purely for self-improvement. It's purely for them to self-assess themselves and to kind of integrate what they learn into their classes. The only thing that we want to see is how many clicks on the website, how many views on the video. So our timeline for this assessment and development. Law school semesters, they run from basically September, December, and February to May. You can't get a law professor to do anything during that time. They're way too busy. It's just impossible. What we have is a 4-week period in January where there's also winter courses in there. It's very tough to fit something in, but I believe a single assessment could be done there. And then during the summer, be time for about 2 assessments because there's an 8 to 10 week period. It's not just important to have enough time for people to take the assessment and to read through the material, but we need to give them the time to actually implement this stuff into the semester. This doesn't work if somebody reads the material, they're like, that's awesome, I'm gonna apply that next year. And like they're a visiting professor and they're gone in like 9 months and totally useless. Instead, we want them to have the time to actually implement this into the upcoming semester. So that's why the summer is the main concentration point for this. Also, it's the time when we hire in new faculty. So anybody new coming in would absolutely have to do stuff like this to really understand it. These are some of our sources that we used. Obviously, in the midst of this, like I'm sure everybody like taking down, scribbling down kind of useless, but on the video, that'll make much more sense to be able to look through those at your own pleasure. And hopefully we've piqued some interest here on how to do a faculty tech assessment, why it's important to assess our faculties. Tech competency, somebody said yesterday, basically dropping the tech off of that and just calling it a competency, that's absolutely correct. So hopefully this makes people more competent as we go through with it. Thank you. Should be so.
We apologize that we're not using GoToMeeting.
Yeah, I'm having some kind of weird network thing. It's causing my laptop, which is the host machine for this whole shebang, drop off the network. So when that does happen, that's causing some weird things out there, but it seems to keep working. So I think we can just continue on.
You have a network port on your computer or an app.
Can you see the whole slide on the computer?
Yes.
Yeah.
Let me go.
Yeah, you can go, Jessica.
Okay. So I'm Jessica Frank. I'm A to J Authors Project Manager, and my session today is called Building Empathy with Legal Technology. So I'm here to talk to you today about how teaching law students to automate court forms teaches them to care about access to justice. I've been A to J Authors Project Manager for a decade now, and in that decade, I've taught hundreds of law students how to automate legal processes, mostly court forms. And what I've learned is that teaching them to automate a legal form is one thing, but it is uniquely valuable to prepare them for real world practice ready, to make them practice ready lawyers. It teaches them a skill set that they're still not getting in many other areas of their legal education. For example, they learn how to scope out a project. It has to be that Goldilocks of a project. It has to be big enough that it encompasses all the users that really need it, but narrow enough so that they're not overwhelmed with a semester's worth of work. The students learn programming, so coding, even with low code platforms like A2J Author. It stretches their little lawyer brains in a way that they are generally not comfortable with, but I guarantee that they will learn how to low code in 14 weeks and they will come to love it. Conditional statements, drafting logic, branching, if-else statements, all of that knowledge that they're learning while they're learning to code is teaching them different ways to think about the law and precedents and how one thing flows into another. They're also learning time management and learning how to cooperate because they're often working with a partner. These are all soft skills, but they're highly relevant in the real world. These courses can be taught online or in person or some combination of both, so that's helpful during the pandemic. And they've all been equally successful in producing real world products that are useful for end users. But I'm preaching to the choir here about teaching law students to use legal technology. My real goal is the why access to justice part. All the skills that I've mentioned in my last slide could be taught in other courses in biz orgs and corporations and tax, and they'd still be valuable to the students. But I've found that there is something uniquely special about combining legal technology and an exposure to the access to justice crisis. Before I go any further, let me talk a little bit about why A2J Author was created, why Cali is involved in access to justice, and where the US stands in terms of our access to justice crisis. So study after study has shown that roughly 80% of the civil legal needs of the poor go unmet each year in the US. More troubling, though, is that in April of this year, the Legal Services Corporation came out with their unmet civil legal needs study, and it's now 92% of low-income people face at least one legal issue each year that they can't or don't deal with. And statistically, 13.1% of the US population is living in poverty. It's about 42 million people. And if you factor in the people who are living near poverty, that's another 15 to 20% that would likely be income eligible for legal aid. And that's leaving you with 100 million people in the United States who each year need legal assistance and don't get it. And it's not just traffic tickets. It is traffic tickets, which can lead to fines and imprisonment, but it's not just that. It's also custody, child custody arrangements that need to be changed and don't. It is domestic violence petitions that don't get filed properly and restraining orders that don't get issued. It is consumer debt that isn't dealt with, or medical debt that results in default judgments and docked paychecks. It is foreclosure or eviction, so the landlord or the loan holder is not following the proper procedures, but people are still losing their homes because they don't know how to deal with the legal system. These civil legal issues are often just about the worst situation that any person is going to find themselves in their lives. Now let's talk about why they're not getting the legal help that they need. So even if people identify their issue as a legal one, and even if they make it to a legal aid organization, and even if they're income eligible for that assistance, 50% of the time they're turned away because there aren't enough legal aid attorneys to help them. And often it's much worse. So this year, Cali is working with Nevada Legal Services on a grant application, and they shared some of their statistics with me as we were writing the application. So in Nevada alone, a legal needs study found that there were 147,000 legal issues a year among people who were living at 125% of the poverty guidelines or below. And legal services providers were only able to serve 24% of those people each year. And across the country, people are regularly turned away from legal aid organizations, and with nowhere to go, they necessarily become self-represented litigants. One of the most challenging aspects of representing yourself in court are the forms. So as you know, forms are written by lawyers for lawyers. They're overly complicated. They're full of legalese. They are oftentimes way too difficult for self-represented litigants to fill out on their own. And by design, they were meant to be a gatekeeper to the justice system. So to recap all those funny statistics, 100 million people who are too poor to afford a lawyer. There aren't enough free or low-cost lawyers by about 50 to 75% of the need. And when people are forced into this justice system with these legal form barriers, they're dealing with just about the worst thing that can happen to them in their life. That's where A2J Author comes in. So Cali and Chicago Kent developed A2J Author in 2005, as a tool that it was intended to transfer the legal expertise of a lawyer into a form that could be accessed as often as it needed, 100,000 times, 24/7, all online. It is multiplying the impact of a single attorney's knowledge, their expertise, in a way that doesn't require you to be a programmer. It doesn't require coding. It is lawyers, law students, other legal professionals who are using the tools in A2J Author to build complex expert systems. So to date, A2J Author interviews, called A2J Guided Interviews, have been used 7 million times by litigants in 44 states and 4 countries. Now, a lot of people argue that we should just throw more lawyers at the problem. The answer to access to justice crisis is more lawyers. And this is a controversial take because I am a lawyer, but I don't think that having a real life lawyer is always the right solution to the problem. Lawyers are expensive, and even if we as a country had the political will to fund low cost and free lawyers for everybody's legal issues, still a really big if. I still don't think that's the solution to our problem. So anecdotally, we live in a do-it-yourself culture where people don't necessarily want to spend the money. They just need a little bit of help or to watch a video or to learn a little bit about it, and then they can do it themselves. But beyond the anecdotal, we have data that shows that having a lawyer is sometimes less effective than doing it yourself. So Michigan Legal Help, which is runs the statewide legal aid website in Michigan, got permission from the court to add a tag to the footer of their automated documents. Then they had interns that went to several courthouses, found those forms with the tags on them, followed them through the legal process. They compared those automated documents, self-helpers, their forms, to those cases where parties have been represented by attorneys. They looked at data points like the complexity of the case, the length of time the case was pending, rates of different types of judgments, so default or consent, whether the defendant showed up, and rate of case completion. They found that self-represented litigants concluded the divorce process in less time than attorney-represented litigants. So this finding was true even when controlling for other factors such as complexity. The self-represented litigants using automated forms created by attorneys and law students are just as successful at solving their legal problems as getting divorced and often get it done quicker. And if I haven't convinced you yet, we're going to let the end users talk for them, which is what's on the screen. These are a sampling of comments by New York courts DIY forms. The New York courts were an early adopter of A2J Author and have consistently run over 125,000 runs of an interview each year for the last 15 years. So they have, and with every one of their DIY forms, they include a paper survey that's hand filled out checkboxes about their experience. At the very end, there's a comment box that says anything else you want to add. Well, a couple of years ago, we had an intern that worked with the New York team, cataloged them, and they came up with 14,000 handwritten responses dating back to 2009. And the ones that were sorted and related to their use of the software, so their interaction with A2J Author and the automated system, 90% of those were positive. And that's what we see on the screen here. The New York courts tweet this out. They have a Feedback Friday. They have a website where you can go, the New York DIY, if you Google it, and you'll find their testimonials on there as well. And the clerks love it too. So the New York clerks don't take public-facing surveys, but we know the team that is automating forms. So behind the scenes, they've relayed that the clerks love that they don't have to explain basic form filling to end users. They get forms that aren't written in crayon or that are legible, or that they can help more people. One of them was even, I really enjoy being able to drink my coffee in the morning without all these people bothering me. So there's appreciation from the end users and also from the court system as well. So great. Automated forms are awesome. Users love them. They're less expensive. They get their legal issues solved just as well as people with lawyers. Every form should be automated. Like that should be a basic of our justice system. That hasn't happened either. So there are 2,000 automated legal forms in this court and legal aid space, but there are thousands more that could be automated. In 2020, Cali hired an A2J tech fellow named Alexandra Jones, and Alexandra spent the summer looking at automated forms for us. She built on an earlier study that Chicago Kent Center for Access to Justice and Technology had done, where she looked at the top 25 most run automated forms by self-represented litigants, or for self-represented litigants in the US, some of which are shown here. Then she reviewed the states and determined whether these top self-represented litigant forms were available in each state. by far, most were not automated in every state. The most coverage was in divorce, name change, and fee waiver. But Alexander's research found that 35% of the total forms that were most used by self-represented litigants were unavailable online in every state. And 16% of the total forms were non-fillable PDFs. So they might have, well, just be paper forms. So there's plenty of work out there for you still. So there's the ray of hope in all of this gloom. To cut through that Cali crisis that John was talking about yesterday, the ray of hope is law school. So law school can help, they should help, and you have been helping to automate forms over the past decade. So since 2012, we have had over 25 law schools that have taught an A to J author course, at least once, but often for several semesters, several years, where students learn about and use A to J author to automate legal forms and legal processes that benefit their local communities. Some will work with legal aids or courts that aren't in their local area, but most are very close to the law school, benefiting people who are in their communities. And these courses produce real automated documents that end users can then use in their community. Most of these courses have requirements that the students get out and interact with their potential end users. So seeing the struggles that these people, these users are going to interact, who are going to be their users, seeing what they're like in real life. This can be done in a variety of ways. When I helped teach a course here at Chicago Kent, we required our students to do 20 hours of volunteer work at the Daily Center's Self-Help Web Center. So it's a help desk that is in the clerk's office where it's completely student run. They interact with thousands of litigants every year and help them fill out forms and find online resources. Other schools have required that students go and interact or go sit in courtrooms where you're most likely going to have heavy self-represented litigant populations. So courtrooms that do family law, evictions, consumer debt. Because there's a 20-hour requirement, the students aren't doing this in a one and done day. You know, they interact once, go to court one day and they're done. So it requires them to have multiple interactions with self-represented litigants. And they get a repeated exposure to the access to justice crisis. And that's where empathy and legal technology collide. So empathy is built when you're repeatedly exposed to those outside of your normal bubble. You move beyond sympathy, beyond feeling bad for them for the situation they're in, to really understanding what it is like to be in their shoes and what they're going through. And that is what's going to make these students great lawyers. So in addition to real world observations and interactions, the students have to do a deep dive into the legal material, the subject, in order to be able to teach the law within the automated form to the litigants. They have to really know the form and its complexities in order to build an efficient automated program. So we teach them how to break down complex legal issues into bite-sized chunks, to turn those bite-sized chunks into plain language, and then to add additional resources like videos, images, outlinks, and text explanation definitions. We call those just-in-time learning features. Learning a software program is not easy for law students. And even if they're digital natives, there's some pushback. But our course evaluations, not just in the Chicago Kent one, but these quotes come from multiple courses. They've shown that the students really like this kind of course and find it very impactful. It's nothing like they've experienced before, and it is very different from other courses that they're not used to. So it shows that the students can channel that zeal, that thing that brought them to law school, to be that Atticus Finch, to be that, you know, you want to be a lawyer and stand up for justice, but then they also see technology and they want to combine the two. And so they learn that they don't have to be just a techie or a public interest lawyer. They can be both. So now that I've sold you on the importance of teaching these types of courses, and you didn't see your school on that list a couple slides ago, here's how Cali can support you. We've created a special tab on our website, a2jauthor.org. That's the top screenshot. It's a law school courses tab. You can go to it and find 2 different editions of a course kit that's going to include syllabi, reading lists, and the pedagogy behind why certain professors have put this into a professionalism course, a doctrinal course, a clinic, the one specifically on legal technology. There's a wide range of courses and how you can fit automation and access to justice into that. We have sample exercises. That's what's scrolling on the screen. There's over a dozen of them. You can assign them as homework or teach your students how to automate using these practice examples. We have a YouTube video, YouTube channel, youtube.com/A to J author. Dozens of videos on there with supplemental training for your law students. Our staff, Mimi, is available to come into your class if you want help teaching a specific section on the access to justice and document assembly. You want me to teach them the software, we've done that before. All of our materials are open source, so the code behind A to J author, both the authoring platform, the document assembly tool, and the viewer that is used to play the guided interviews for end users can all be hosted, and it's all open source with great training materials that were created, or great self-hosting materials that were created by Santarejo. He's available if you want to self-host. Cali has a2j.org, which is our hosting site where we will provide hosting for free for anyone doing this for self-represented litigants. All of it's to say that we will support you however you need in teaching your law students about access to justice and legal technology. And you can feel free to reach out to us. Thank you. I stopped sharing this one.
Alrighty, up next, Mark Lawrenson, and he's got a video, which is called Building a Course on.
Mark, your presentation.
Thanks. Building a Course on a Shaky Foundation. So let's just see if I can get this.
Yeah, I share.
I'll share. Yep. Anyway, launches like right away. So it's screen one, and then optimize for video and share.
About a new course that I'm offering at Suffolk Law School in Boston this fall. I'll leave this description up for a second so you can browse it. The basic idea is to combine a very old topic, namely the works of William Shakespeare and the question about his identity, with very modern technology, namely tools for doing collaborative knowledge work, specifically as relates to litigation and factual analysis. This is me, and this is a book I've recently published in a second edition, and my contact information. Some of you may remember me from a keynote I gave back in 2001 at the Cali conference. You can see a guy here introducing me. That's John Mayer when he was still a teenager. Very quickly, my career and how it relates to this course. I began life as a legal aid lawyer, transitioned to a clinical teacher, found myself involved in legal technology research project I'll talk about in a second. Formed a consulting group called Capstone Practice, which continues to today. We build custom applications for law firms, law departments, nonprofits, courts, etc. I took a sabbatical during the dot-com era to a company called AmeriCounsel. Formed a company called Legal Systematics, another startup called All About Choice, to popularize a decision support tool that I've been enthusiastic about. One of my big nonprofit projects over the last 2 decades is a national service of online forums and guided interviews called Law Help Interactive that the Cali A2J author tool has been very much a part of. And for the last decade or so, I've been an adjunct professor at several different law schools. My obsession in legal technology really began back in the mid-'80s. And then my obsession with Shakespeare was reignited in the early 2000s. And I finally have found an opportunity to combine them in one initiative. This is Project Pericles, where I got my footing in legal tech way back in the 80s, and we were working on VAX computers with dumb terminals, etc. One of my main themes throughout this process has been how can we leverage the process of writing software, of creating applications to help law students learn how to think like lawyers. And the premise is you can do that by teaching machines how to think like lawyers. This is a talk I gave at the Future Law Conference in 2014 on that topic, and a link to it in case you're curious. We've sometimes used this notion of apps for justice, of choreographing or conducting digits, binary digits, to write meaningful legal applications as a way to describe this. We use tools like A2J Author, as I described a moment ago, to create useful guided interviews to help people deal with legal problems, and tools like Hot Docs to develop intelligent document templates to go along. So to Shakespeare. The idea for the course is to provide students an opportunity to visit his place and time, to look at some of the legal, policy, and ethical themes that are pervasive throughout the works. We'll focus on 2 plays as examples: The Merchant of Venice, which has some interesting questions about specific performance of contracts. Can a creditor demand a pound of flesh as compensation for a missed payment? How do you deal with the challenges of justice versus equity and mercy? It's got lots of issues about anti-Semitism and gender roles. Measure for Measure is another fascinating play full of legal themes, with a trial like Merchant of Venice has, dealing with issues of regulation of sexuality and questions of good and bad governance and corruption. And we'll touch at least a bit on the sonnets, which are fascinating as a window into the potential actual life of the author. Now, some feel like Shakespeare is old hat, kind of a dead white guy. I often bring up Amanda Gorman, who spoke at Joe Biden's inauguration, who was interviewed by the New York Times and happened to respond to this question: are there any poets for whom you've gained greater appreciation over time? And her answer was Shakespeare, hands down. Kind of fascinating. We don't think of Shakespeare as a poet so much as a playwright, but his poetry was very distinctive. One of the themes for the course is looking back at this very different era, in the 1580s to 1620 approximately, when the plays were written and poems, and having students think about what had already happened in the world before then that was background to this era, what was going on during that time, and what has happened since, and how many things we take for granted in the contemporary world, photography, indoor plumbing, electricity, etc., were far in the future when Shakespeare, whoever he or she was writing this. The other theme is knowledge technology, and I use that as a very broad canvas to describe a range of tools and systems, artificial systems, in 2 main senses. One is systems that actually embody knowledge, artificial intelligence, expert systems of various kinds. And then on the other hand, intelligent tools that help us as humans, either alone or together, do useful cognitive work. And you can think of machine learning, so much in the news these days, as kind of an intermediate form where artificial intelligence is used to discover new forms of knowledge, kind of as both a tool and a medium. One key issue is this question of authorship. Did this guy, William Shakespeare, which is actually how his family name was written and spelled for the most part, really write the plays and poems that came out under the name of Shakespeare, often with a dash or hyphen, signifying kind of a made-up name? And if it wasn't him, if it wasn't the guy from Stratford, who actually wrote this stuff? And how is it that they managed to conceal their identity, not just at the time, but for 400 plus years? One twist on this is the sonnets. Again, I mentioned 154 sonnets, describing this wild set of affairs with men and women, including a rival poet. Who were these people? Was that just imaginary, or does that correspond to some historical question? I think these are all legitimate historical questions, and if you start probing into the topic, you'll discover, as I have, that it's remarkably unsettled, and these issues are still being viciously debated. There are many proffered candidates or suspects for the authoring role. Just some of them are shown here. It's an old controversy. Mark Twain was already talking about it in the mid-19th century. He wrote his last published book on this topic. The doubts go back even further into the contemporary time. Brian Wildenthal, a professor out in California, has written a great book identifying many of those early doubts. And it's continuing today. There's a new book this month by Mark Bradbeer called Amelia Lanier as Shakespeare's co-author. She was one of England's first published women poets shortly thereafter. And there's questions about Shakespeare's sexuality. Was he bisexual? Was he non-binary? Interesting new book about from a queer analytics perspective, looking at the works of Shakespeare. So I think there's a myth to be exploded that Shakespeare wrote Shakespeare. Some of you may know there's an online community that's dedicated to at least saying, hey, there's reasonable doubt about this question. There's a declaration of that you can sign, as I have, signed by thousands of people, saying, hey, don't reject this controversy. It's a real question. And the various camps are viciously fighting each other and raising all kinds of surprises. I correspond with some of these people. One top professor who's written a great book about Shakespeare in general surprised me by saying, I see nothing problematic in the Stratford boy having grown up to write the plays. Another guy who I know supports one of the claimed candidates is contemptuous of another one. None of what he is proposing makes the slightest bit of sense. It could possibly be true. It's completely ridiculous. So the question is, how can we use this topic as a way to dig into some new technologies? And we're going to use at least two in this course. One is called Case Map, now cloud-based, and one is called Story Builder. And the notion is to engage students in wrestling with these tools to try to understand the facts and make sense of the arguments involved in this controversy. The overall themes of the course are really, and the goals are to impart this sheer pleasure of reading some really great literature for students who may have to spend far too much time reading things that they find kind of boring, looking at a very different historical time that is strangely similar to contemporary reality in some ways, providing another context to deal with unusual vocabulary and ideas like the law itself. But I really want to focus students on this notion of critical thinking. What should you believe? How do you resolve these different claims and perspectives? And specifically when it comes to historical facts, what are the stories we construct to explain them? How do we critique them? How do we compare them? And how do we argue effectively when we're trying to convince others? And across all of this, there's the topic of how can these new knowledge technologies actually help us do one or more of the above. I've got an article that appeared in the Journal of Robotics, Artificial Intelligence and Law that delved into a lot of these issues. The link for it is here. The course logistics, I tend to do maker-style courses, project-based, where students are building things, not just writing or arguing. And the artifacts in this context would include databases, timelines, argument maps of various kinds, maybe even a performance of a scene from the play. Very much experiential, like clinical education more generally, very conversational, collegial. I want students to be involved. It's kind of an inverted classroom approach, emphasizing teamwork, having students work together on these problems, learn together with me. I'm very much an amateur myself. Bringing in guest speakers from the various camps on this question. And one of my fun assignments, I think, will be to have students pick up a current newspaper and try to find any and all allusions to Shakespeare and his works in the paper. So lots of open questions. I don't know whether a course like this has been offered before. I don't think so. Will enough students register in the current age? I think it's perceived as kind of a luxury when you're trying to study for the bar. Will this even work? We'll find out. And am I trying to do far too much overall in the course? So I welcome your reactions and questions.
Thank you, Mark. Now we've got I've got a couple of questions for So let's see, I have some questions from the ether here someplace. There we go. And my network connection seems to have stabilized. That's always a good thing. Oh, that's right. Yeah, you can drag that over. Not that one. The one before that. Yeah, this one. Oh, yeah, you see it. You had it on the stage. So everybody can see it. Yeah. Oh, that's good. Right, because now you can just look at me like. Oh, I see. Oh, there you go. Thanks, Emily. Emily knows everything about Zoom, which is handy. An ADJ question for Jessica. You can if you want to, sure, come on down. Yeah, the mic will pick you up anyway, but if you want to come down, and you can make sure you get, yes, thank you. So it says, what overlap, if any, is there between ADJ and online dispute resolution ODR initiatives for self-representative?
So there's not overlap in terms of the actual automation. A2J Author is not used for any of the online dispute resolution platforms. There's some e-filing overlap. So there's work in several states to get automated forms that have been automated and are hosted on Law Health Interactive or on other servers to be able to e-file seamlessly, because a lot of states like Illinois are requiring e-filing. So there's not a direct overlap. They're sort of correlated.
Okay, and are these forms general use, or are there state-specific forms available as well?
They're all state specific, except for a handful. There's some FEMA forms that are applicable across the country. In A2J, there are 1,000 active guided interviews on our Partner Law Health Interactive site, and they are state specific. So LHI has they're on their platform. You can search by the state. Most of these are hosted on court websites or legal aid websites, so they are specific to their jurisdiction.
Right. Let's see, somebody wanted to know, was Shakespeare a Mac or PC? Who asks those kinds of questions? For Brendan and Sarah, what percentage of your faculty have you already done this assessment with?
Right now, it's still just starting off as a pilot program, so like very minimal, like, testing it out on like 1, 2 this summer.
Have you even done that?
No.
So we'll expect you back here next year.
Absolutely.
Let us know how it went. Okay, if you're both still there, then come back. And if you're not still there, your replacements can tell us.
We'll come back. Resume.
Right, that's right.
To get a portfolio.
That's right. Okay, that's all the questions I had from the internet. We'll take questions from the room. I see Emily.
I have a question for Brendan and Sarah. Would you open source your form question? You have them outside of Microsoft Word.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Anyone else? Anyone? You see, everybody knows lunch is set up outside. All right, so it's a quick one.
Any thought, I know you touched on it, though, expanding the competency to like whether or not faculty can teach. It's a funny question, but it's a serious one. I don't know that faculty get much training in how to be educators.
That's like a huge part of it that bothers me a lot about law schools, that everybody who teaches, very few of them, like I'm like, does anybody in this room have any sort of like educational background, like an education degree? Like 2, 3, right? It's crazy that so many people like work in law school, teach in law school, and have no idea the basics of how to teach somebody a subject. So that's like absolutely a huge like part of this, is getting just the basics down. Like reviewing material with a quiz after the material, like that's 101 education.
All right. Anybody else? If not, thank the panelists. Break for lunch, the library tours are at noon.
On the
starting
ninth
at
floor.
On the ninth
Bye,
floor,
folks.
and we'll be back here at